Whatever happened to salt and shake crisps? I did a quick Google search last night, and yes, apparently they are still available. They are on the websites of most major supermarkets, but I must say, I can't remember seeing them on the shelves recently. And salt and shake crisps, if you're old enough to remember, is that perfect experiment between food without salt and food with salt. So just plain crisps without shaking, without putting that little bag of salt in and shaking the packet, are really, really bland. But once you've put the salt in, then of course they taste a lot better. Salt makes things so much more tasty. And salt, of course, also purifies, and it also preserves. We're at that point in Mark's Gospel where Jesus is continuing to address tensions within his band of followers. Remember at this point that they had been arguing. An argument had broken out about who was the greatest. And in addressing this argument, if you were here last week or you've heard the sermon, you'll remember that Jesus responded by putting a little child in their midst, as if to say, this is the greatest. And Jesus continues to kind of address this argument that's blown up amongst them. And he holds out two terrifying possibilities for them. And it's not easy reading. But the first one is that if they're not careful, they will end up like salt that has lost its taste. If they're not careful in their relationships with one another, they will end up like salt losing its taste. And once salt has lost its taste, it can't recover that taste once again. Secondly, the other danger, which Jesus spells out 3 times, is if his followers are not careful in their relationships, they will end up like rubbish that is only fit to be thrown on the local rubbish dump. When Jesus mentions hell in this reading, he is referring to Gehenna, which was the local rubbish dump in Jerusalem. It's got nothing to do with the afterlife. It's got nothing to do with eternal punishment or anything like that. He's just referring to the local rubbish tip. And he's warning them again. If they don't take care in their relationships, they will end up as good as that rubbish which is thrown on the local tip, which is constantly kind of smouldering and burning. So, nice, happy gospel reading today. It's one of those gospel readings where, we say this is the gospel of the Lord. This is the good news. And we kind of think, is it? But anyway, let's do our best. So, what puts Jesus' friends then and now in such danger in terms of their relationships one with another? Well, there are 3 dangers that Jesus points out. The first danger is being exclusive rather than inclusive. And this is to do with John's conversation with Jesus at the beginning of our gospel reading. Teacher, we saw somebody casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us. And maybe John is trying to earn himself a few spiritual brownie points at this point, having blotted his copybook before. But Jesus replies, no, you got it wrong again, John. Don't stop him. Don't stop him. Because no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. And then above all, he comes out with that saying, whoever is not against us is for us. Whoever is not against us is for us. So this is about being inclusive rather than exclusive. On the front page of the Church Times this week, are two stories about multi-faith and interfaith relations. First of all, there's a big headline about a multi-faith declaration that has been made by various faith leaders running up to the COP conference in November, the crucial climate change conference that is coming up. It's called the Glasgow Multi-Faith Declaration. And in that declaration, various faith leaders from various faiths urge governments to take urgent action to avert the loss, damage, and forced migration threatened by climate change. The second headline is entitled, "What Muslim Students Can Teach Christians?" And it quotes research which suggests that Muslim students in the UK have a much more positive attitude towards their studies, helping their faith to grow and develop, than their Christian counterparts. And it argues that maybe Christian students can benefit from emulating their Muslim colleagues' example. So maybe a modern educational equivalent of receiving a cup of water, in that sometimes as followers of Christ, we can and we should learn from other faiths and other traditions. And in that sharing, people from beyond the church, Jesus says, are blessed and rewarded. Whoever is not against us is for us. Don't write off people in other churches. Don't write off people in other faiths. Don't write off people in other communities, even if they're very, very different from your own. Collaborate, says Jesus, rather than compete. Collaborate wherever you can. The second danger that Jesus spells out in our relationships is complacency rather than discipline. And this is where we get into this strange language of millstones and stumbling blocks and cutting off hands and feet and gouging out eyes. It's all very strange language indeed. What's Jesus trying to get across here? Well, I think he's saying this. In our relationships with other believers, so now he's addressing relationships within the community rather than without. In your relationships with other believers, particularly those who might be vulnerable in some way, so he uses this language of little ones, the little ones who believe in me. Remember, he's just put a child amongst them. So he's talking about maybe the smallest, the most vulnerable. In your relationships with your fellow believers, particularly when they are vulnerable, take care over your actions, which is represented by the hands. Take care about your lifestyle, where you put yourself, which is represented by your feet. And take care over your attitudes, how you view others. That's maybe where the eyes come in. Jesus is saying take care in all of these areas. Because if you don't take care, you might be putting a stumbling block before a brother or a sister. In the Old Testament, a stumbling block is literally a piece of rock that you would put in the path of a blind person. Not sure why you would ever want to do that, but anyway, it's forbidden in the law of Moses. And that's where this language comes from. It's a stone that you put in somebody's way, and it frustrates their journey. In the same way, says Jesus, we must beware in our own actions, in our own lifestyle, in our own attitudes, of putting stumbling blocks in front of one another in terms of our journey of faith. And if we do so, the consequences will be serious for them, but they will also be serious for us. Over the last few Wednesday evenings, we've been following the creation season prayers, which again have been a collaborative effort from all kinds of different traditions across the church. And the point was made in our prayers last Wednesday that maybe the church has put a stumbling block in front of younger people. If you know of any younger people, if you have younger people in your life, children or young people, there is every likelihood that they are very anxious about the future. They're very anxious about the future in terms of the environment, in terms of climate change. They're anxious, they're often very passionate in wanting to do something about this, and it's a big, big thing to them. And there is an argument, and research seems to be backing this up, that maybe the traditional churches, for whom this maybe hasn't been big on their agenda up to now, it's huge now, but it hasn't been until quite recently. Maybe that has actually been putting a stumbling block in the path of younger disciples and younger would-be disciples. It's something to think about, something maybe to repent of. We need, says Jesus, not to be complacent in our relationships, but to be self-disciplined, to be self-aware. Otherwise, we can fall into this trap of alienating certain people who would want to belong in our community. The third danger is conflict rather than peace. Again, let's not forget the context here. There's just been an argument amongst Jesus' disciples. And Jesus says to them, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. There is that image of salt again, salt which purifies, salt which preserves. So there's something here about purity of motive. But there is that injunction to be at peace with one another. Peace is not just about an absence of conflict. Again, we've been thinking about this in our Wednesday prayers. The biblical concept of peace is much more active and it's much more positive. The biblical concept of peace is something like seeking the flourishing of the other person. That's what shalom, that's what biblical peace means. And this is the attitude that Jesus is seeking amongst his disciples. Seek peace rather than conflict. So to summarize, Jesus is saying to his disciples then, and he's saying to his disciples now, when it comes to relationships, 1, be inclusive rather than exclusive. 2, be disciplined rather than complacent about your own motives and actions. Thirdly, be at peace rather than in conflict, seeking each other's flourishing. According to Jesus, whether we do one or the other can be the difference between heaven and hell. Perhaps one of the best and simplest commentaries on these difficult verses can be found in the words of none other than Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens once wrote, "Have a heart that never hardens, have a temper that never tires, and have a touch that never hurts." Amen.